frankly thought that the whole Watergate affair was a dirty trick of the Democrats.
Clearly, I think people were very interested that all of a sudden there was a Southern Baptist that had become president.
It's not a spectator sport. You can't sit on the sidelines and then complain after it's over.
Let's see, I'm right here. Okay. All right. We need you over here.
I like this chair.
You like it? Okay.
I like the dog, too.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here today for what is a program I've been working to organize for a long time. But it's a sad day for Americans because of the passing of a good friend of the Doles, Secretary Jack Kemp. And I just wanted to ask both of you to share a story or an insight on Secretary Kemp and what he meant to America.
Yes, well, let me say that just a few months ago, when I was running for re-election to the Senate, Jack Kemp was with me in North Carolina, traveling on a bus through the mountains. And, you know, he was so full of energy and enthusiasm and just a great example of the public servant who has that passion for what he does. And so we enjoyed being together, and then just a short time later, we learned that of the illness, and so we've been in close touch with them, and it's heartbreaking. I remember back in the early days when I was assistant to the president for public liaison, I worked on the very issue that Jack was sponsoring in the Congress, and that was the 25% tax cuts over 3 years. And I was trying to work on it for President Reagan. He was working on it from the Congress, and of course there have been many times when we've had those opportunities to work together. But he will be truly missed, and he is the epitome of a person who is passionate, full of enthusiasm, and believes in what he's doing with all his heart.
Well, I remember writing Jack a note about 3 weeks ago now. In fact, earlier when he learned that he had this very serious problem, he called me and Elizabeth one night and told us that I've got cancer and the prospects are not very good. And so you didn't, you know, you want to go visit, but you can't have visitors. And then he couldn't talk, which for Jack Kemp is, you know,
It's tough.
not being able to talk is a tough sentence in itself, because Jack's wife used to pull on his coattail to get him to stop talking. But he's just a good guy and a good friend, and as a Republican, he was one of those Republicans who wanted to make the party bigger for the right reasons. And he never gave up hope, reaching out to different groups. And I think that was the part that I really give Jack credit for being one of the first Republicans to reach out to other people. And if we're going to have a two-party system, our party is going to have to get busy. But Jack was a great friend, and I'll miss him.
I'd like to add just one thing, though. When Bob Dole was the Republican National Chairman, and this is when we met, actually, he actually took the door off of his office as a signal of outreach to try to bring more people in, independents, people
They
who
took
might
the
have...
door off of the building, not my office.
Well, Senator Elizabeth Dole, let me ask you this. You've had this incredible career in public service. How did it get started? What developed this motivation?
I want to say, first of all, my first job in elected politics was when I was elected president of the 3rd grade Bird Club, okay? And then a few years later, I started an organization, a junior book club, and I found the minutes recently, Bill, and they're great. We had all kinds of good speakers come in and all, and I was just a kid, but I made myself president. I have learned a little more about democracy since those days. And then I think in high school and at Duke University, I became very much involved in student government and also majored in political science. And so I think the whole world of public policy, politics was like a magnet to me. I really loved what I did. And you know, the elections that I lost, I learned probably more from than the ones I won. But I had the privilege of serving as my student government president my senior year. And to be able to preside over a town hall meeting once a month, to interact with students and faculty and alumni, the trustees, and mediate between all the needs, I learned a great deal, and I really think that was what led me then ultimately into this as a career.
Senator Bob Dole, you were a student here at KU before you went to the Army. What were your days here like?
Well, they weren't going to class, I can say that.
Oh.
You know, we had all these farewell parties. Everybody was leaving for the Army, Navy, Air Force. So every night you'd be up half the night at somebody's farewell party, and you didn't feel like going to class.
Oh, gosh.
I remember Dean Woodruff. How many remember Dean Woodruff? There'd be a few. Called me in one day, and he said, "You know, Bob, I've been checking, and you're not doing much academically. Have you ever thought about the Army?" And I said, "Yes, I've thought about it. In fact, I've enlisted, and I'll be going fairly soon." But it's one of those things that I think it's a lesson to a lot of young people. I didn't apply myself. I had no discipline. But when I came back from World War II, I knew, you know, it was time for me to do something. And from making D's and C's, I think I only made one B at Washburn in law school and the other. And I don't say it in a boasting way, but I say it to students who sometimes get a little depressed and, you know, their grades go down. And but I found that if you really are sort of your back against the wall and you know it's time for you to do something with your life, you can do it. And it worked for me, and I'm sure it'll work for you. And I've always thanked Dean Woodruff for giving me that little shove out the door.
Well, Senator, you first ran for Congress in 1960. But you'd been served in office before. What got you interested in public service?
A Democratic law librarian. In law school in Washburn, convinced, I think, three of us. Her name was Beth Bowers, wonderful lady. She's passed away about 7 years ago. Said, you know, we need, just like I'm saying to people now with the Dole scholars and others, we need more public service, more young people, and that was her theme. We need to have more young people involved. And so she talked to 3 or 4 of us into running for the state legislature. And we didn't know anything about politics. We didn't even know what party we were in. I went home and counted, and there were more Republicans than Democrats in Russell, so I became a committed Republican. And but Beth Bowers was a spark, and I think 2 of us out of the 4 were elected, and we've sort of been in politics since.
The rest is history.
Definitely.
But it shows that one person can make a difference in your life that, you know, lasts forever.
Senator Elizabeth Dole, you were part of the pioneering generation of women in the 60s and 70s, women leaders in the 60s and 70s. What unique challenges did you face?
Well, it's interesting because my career sort of spans this last wave of the women's movement. And you think about all the qualified women who have come into the workforce over that time. But back at the point that I went to law school, as was mentioned earlier, I entered Harvard Law School in the fall of '62, and there were 550 in the class, and 24 were female. And the very first day of class, I remember where I was standing in Langdale Hall Library, and one of my male classmates came up to me and he said, "Elizabeth, what are you doing here? What are you doing in this law school?" He said, "Don't you realize there are men who give their right arm to be here? Men who would use their legal education." Now that's how I was greeted. Those were the first words I heard. That man is now a senior partner in a Washington law firm. And every now and then I tell that story around town. In fact,
He won't give me his name.
I love to tell that story around town. And then the guys will call up, and they say, "Elizabeth, please, tell me I'm not the one who said it. Tell me I didn't say it." I'm just letting them sweat it out. But, I remember that vividly, of course. And then as I came along when I was on the Federal Trade Commission, I was one of 5 commissioners. And yet I never thought of it, and I don't think they thought of it as being the female commissioner. We just worked together. I got to the Department of Transportation, and I had 100,000 in the workforce. And I said, "Okay, how many are female?" And they said 19% of your staff are female. Okay, this is 1983, and I said, in 1967, when the Department of Transportation was established, how many women were in the department? 18.5%. From 67 to 83, they'd come up a half a percentage point. So we went to work, and the women, thought, "Oh, sure, every secretary says they're going to help the women." So we got the women to work with us to put together a 10-point program. Rotational assignments. If you're at the Federal Railroad Administration, maybe you go over to the FAA or the Highway Safety Administration, rotational. And we had reward structures, we had developmental programs, sort of like in the corporate world, to help women move up the ladder into managerial positions. And Bill, one of the things that I love, this has happened to me twice, going through an airport, and someone comes running after me, "Secretary Dole, Secretary Dole." And I stop, and she says, "I'm now the manager of this airport, and it's because I went through your women's program at DOT." So, we still have to help and network and do these things. One more, this is an interesting little story. I was working
How long is it?
That's not funny. Better watch out. You're going to get in big trouble. You're going to be in the doghouse pretty soon. Who's going to fix your dinner?
I'm glad I'm not on the jet on the way back.
Well, I was working for a Democratic senator one summer, and Margaret Chase Smith was just down the hall. And I had the gall, I was just a young Duke graduate then, and I asked to see her, and I went in, and she was wonderful. She really helped me, and she was the one who inspired me to go to law school. But she was known as the conscience of the Senate, wonderful woman. But she told me this little story. She said, "I was just with a group of female reporters, and they were asking me, 'Senator Smith, if you woke up one morning and found yourself in the White House, what would you do?' And she said, I replied, I'd go right away to the president's wife and apologize." And then I'd go home. See how things have changed over that period of my career, really. So I think being the first woman to head a branch of the armed services was an interesting challenge. But I find people in the Coast Guard now who will tell me they really love those days, and so I don't think they looked at me differently because I was a woman. And of course, all of it has been changing enormously so that things really are quite different now. We've not reached the millennium, but we're getting there.
Senator Bob Dole, you've lived, since the war, you've lived with a disability. How's that motivated you? How have you used that to motivate you, but also how's that affected your attitudes towards others with disabilities?
Well, let's see, there's a saying, strength through adversity. And I think of these, I spend a lot of time visiting young soldiers now, and a lot of time visiting soldiers my age, 85, 86, 82, 84, because we never want to forget our veterans. and not only to forget our veterans, and never want to forget our generation, because not everybody could wear a uniform. Somebody had to teach and farm and all these things. So I wrote a book called One Soldier's Story, and it's really, wasn't an act of bravery that I did, that I had one round left and there were 500 coming at me and all this stuff. But I think I conducted myself as a patient. If there was any heroism, it was how I handled my recovery. Because, well, let's see, I couldn't walk, I couldn't feed myself, and a lot of people have gone through this, not just me. And so it takes a lot of patience, and a lot of perseverance, and a lot of help from your friends and your family. And so then I was able to walk, and later I could, with a button hook, button your shirt, things like that. So as long as they're incremental steps, they're not big steps you take, as probably some know in the audience. And with each little step, you're encouraged to try to take the next step. And, I think I have two heroes. One is Eisenhower, and one is Roosevelt. Eisenhower for reasons different, but Roosevelt because of what he did with his disability. And at that time, they kept it from the press. I think there are only 3 photographs, public, of Roosevelt with these braces on. They didn't the press wasn't, well, I don't say anything about the press. The press, they left privacy. They believed in privacy. And he was entitled to privacy. So those are sort of my 2 heroes. But we do a lot of work with the disabled. I did a lot of work with the American Disabilities Act. And now I need to find somebody in the audience who can fix my knees.
Yeah. He also visits veterans' hospitals everywhere he goes, everywhere. And just no press, just quietly. We were on vacation in North Carolina, and the first place he wanted to go was the Asheville Veterans Hospital. So it's just a part of Bob Dole to do those things, and at the World War II Memorial, to meet people coming in on Honor Flight, Honor Air, the Honor Flight Network. These are veterans who've been provided a charter plane, and they come in and they visit their memorial for the first time.
Cost them a dime.
World War II.
I met 400 veterans yesterday.
And that's about the 76th time he's been at the memorial to meet them.
But I might put a plug in there, because if your father's living or your grandfather, there's no greater gift. I can tell you, I've seen thousands of these World War II veterans who felt that they were forgotten, that they were old, and they were sort of out of the mainstream. Nobody ever did anything with them or for them. And so they started this program where I had a group from Kansas 2 days ago, come to Washington, see the memorials, have lunch, tell war stories, whatever. Get back on the plane, you do it all in one day, and it doesn't cost you 1 cent. And it's all money given by people like you. And well, Elizabeth, tell them about the letter that this one person wrote.
Beautiful letter. He just wrote in and he said he was in his 80s, mid-80s, I think, and he said, I've just been kind of going through depression. I just wonder, has my life really meant anything? And he said, I got on this plane flight to Washington to see the World War II Memorial, and he said, I realize I think I really have accomplished something in life. you know, there's a legacy that I'm proud to leave to my children. I remember when Bob was working so hard to get it built, and there was a group called Save the Mall, and they didn't want it to be built on the mall. And that was just outrageous. I mean, who saved the mall? The men and women of World War II saved the mall. There wouldn't be any mall without it. So I think he has a great legacy to pass on. That's the point.
This man, he says, the most exciting thing that happened since his wedding. Now, that may not be...
I don't remember that part of the letter.
Unanimous in the room. But he just changed his life, and he probably got a few years left. And he finally convinced himself that he did make a contribution. I don't know what he did. He could have been a private, he could have been a general. But he was there when he was called, and then things sort of drifted away, and he felt like nobody cared about him.
It's a great
But
legacy.
he changed his mind.
How did the two of you meet? Talk a little bit about that, your courtship, but also talk about what it was like as essentially newlyweds, you know, less than a year later to be in a vice presidential
Can I
campaign.
start? Yeah, I
You
think
can
I will
start, but there's a time limit, yeah.
We all know that. I'm going to talk very fast. I was working in the White House Consumer Affairs office, and I had a wonderful mentor, a woman who was just terrific, and she wanted to go up to talk to the chairman of the Republican National Committee to get a consumer plank in the platform, the 1972 platform. And so I went with her, and we walked in to this gentleman's office who was in the Senate, and he was not at his desk. He was over on the Senate floor. So the door opens up, and in comes Bob Dole. First time I'd ever seen him. And I looked up, and I thought, gee, he's a good-looking guy. He says he wrote my name on the back of his blotter. But anyway, this was, I think it was about, maybe 4 months later. He was traveling the country at that point. And I saw him again at the convention. And then he called me. And we talked for 40 minutes. We had all these mutual interests and friends and so on. And then he said goodbye. And then about 2 weeks later, he called again, and we talked for quite a while. And he said, well, maybe we could have dinner sometime. And I said, well, that would be very nice. And he said goodbye. And it was on the third call that he asked me out to dinner. And what I realized was he's a little shy, and I like that. He's not somebody chasing women around Capitol Hill. You know, I really like that very much.
Well, I think it's, I was looking for a nice, cheap place, too.
But one other point here that I have to make. Bob came down to North Carolina to visit my parents.
Don't tell that one.
No.
About your mother?
Yeah.
No, I don't like that.
Oh, no, I do. I've already started. I have to tell it now. Plus, it ties in with the last question that Bill asked you. Bob, unbeknownst to me, went down, he left his room one morning and went down where my mother was fixing breakfast in the kitchen. And he had a towel over his arm that had been disabled in the war. And he went up to my mother and he said, Miss Hanford, I think you ought to see my problem. And Mother said, Bob, that is not a problem, it's a badge of honor. I think that said a lot about both of them. So.
Senator Elizabeth Dole, you served in cabinets for 2 presidents, but you chose to put your husband first and resign from the cabinet to support the '88 presidential campaign. Why?
Well, it was an easy choice, and some of the women's organizations really gave me a little grief on this and said, why are you leaving your career to be the good little wife, you know, to stand by your husband's side and smile? And so I tried to make a point out of this, that I did not have to do this. I chose to do it. And I think that's what we women have been fighting for, is to have the right to do what we feel is best for ourselves and for our families. And it doesn't have to be a paid job that you're in. In fact, my career continued. because as it turned out, I had my own airplane and I had a staff, and I was out there answering the questions and being a part of the campaign. And so I learned and grew a lot by having that particular responsibility. And can you imagine saying to your husband, well, you're going to run for president, goodbye, good luck, and I'll see you when it's over? You know, I mean, I wanted to do this. I wanted to be a part of the campaign, and to me, it was an honor to do so, and it also was a great education. And I think that's what it's all about, being able to make the choice that you feel is best, and having the ability to do that, to feel that you can be flexible. And there, certainly that's, I took a leave of absence when Bob was running for vice president from the Federal Trade Commission, and they were understanding. We checked it out that it was okay with the Hatch Act for me to do that, and I had a couple of months leave of absence there, so it's worked fine for me to sort of, you know, be able to step out and to be a part of his campaigns.
Yeah, I really wanted to be president. I used to drive by the White House a lot. And look in the windows from the street and see if I could see anything going on.
Senator Bob Dole, you faced lots of really tough decisions in your career, but I know one of the toughest that you had, and I'd like you to speak just a little bit about it, was your decision to actually resign your Senate seat and your leadership to run for president in '96.
Yeah, and some of my Kansas friends haven't forgiven me yet, because I could have stayed, I could have worked it out, and had I lost, gone back as the Senate leader. But it seemed to me that once you're nominated for whatever, it doesn't have to be politics, your student body president or whatever, when you've kind of reached the high point in any career, then you shouldn't try to have it both ways and say, well, I'm going to figure out a way I can protect myself so I can go back and be the Republican leader in the Senate. We could have done that very easily. Plus, be very frank about it, I thought it would resonate with the voters, because the voters are generally justified in thinking that people in politics never have enough. They always want more of this, more power, and then they don't properly use it. And I thought, well, here's one guy who's going to give up something. And I know it frustrated some of my friends, because it was good for Kansas to have me as a majority leader and to decide what was going to happen, what the agenda would be, and what was going to pass or not pass. And I knew that I was probably letting people down in a way, but I felt that, well, if it works, then they'll forgive me. If it doesn't work, they'll forgive me after a few years. And one thing I learned is that when you get out of politics, your numbers go up. People forget why they're mad at you. And they say, well, that guy wasn't so bad after all, things like that. But I certainly owe the people of Kansas a big debt of gratitude to think that somebody, and probably somebody here from Russell, but that somebody from a small town, let's put it that way, could get elected to the legislature and then to Congress. And once we had to do it by serving Dole pineapple juice because one of my opponents was named Doyle, and people didn't know him and they didn't know me. So we had ladies with white blouses and red skirts serve Dole pineapple juice up and down Main Street. And Keith Sebelius, who I beat by 900 votes, said he was drowned in pineapple juice. But well, we had a lot of fun. We had covered wagons and everything. But just to think that I was elected 6 times by you, probably not all of you, I'll talk to you later. and I really think the longer I served, the better senator I became, because I recognized that there are problems in other states that we don't have in Kansas. And if I'm going to turn a blind eye to their problems, they're going to turn a blind eye to our problems. But
Well, I'll just break in to say he was also elected 6 times by his Senate colleagues to be their leader, and I think that's huge.
I'll just stop there. The important thing is to be elected by the people out here. I'd be their leader. And it was hard when you disagreed with friends that I knew for a long time on a particular issue. And hopefully, we were able to work it out. So, because when you're the leader, you have to do things that you might not normally do to help your colleagues. I mean, if you don't want to be leader, there are a lot of people who do. And if you don't want to carry the flag for your party, there are 50 others who'd be happy to. So, but anyway, it was a great opportunity and experience, and I enjoyed every minute of it. And some days when I watch C-SPAN, I wish I were back.
How has partisanship and civility changed since both of you went to Washington, D.C.?
Well, during the years that I was serving in the executive branch, and also at the Red Cross, and by the way, when we're talking about the challenges earlier, I need to add a footnote there because I got to the Red Cross in 1991, and you know what I found out? I was the first woman to head the Red Cross since Clara Barton in 1881.
Well,
Clara and me.
I want to add,
We're going off the subject, but we'll be back.
You didn't take any pay the first year because you want to demonstrate that if you're going to be a volunteer, the president ought to be a volunteer too, which I thought was a noble act. So
Well,
I could have used the money.
But during those years, I can remember going up to the Congress and talking with Senator Stevens, Ted Stevens, and talking with Senator Inouye, who had actually been wounded in Italy, and just very near where Bob was wounded, and they both ended up in the Senate. And he's a Democrat from Hawaii. I can certainly remember many times working on the age 21 drinking rule when I was at the Department of Transportation, working with Senator Lautenberg of New Jersey, Democrat. And, we just worked together. These were issues that were important, that were critical. Selling that freight railroad, which took us 3 years. I mean, you had to have a lot of support on both sides of the aisle. And then it seems to me in recent years that it's become much more raucous and less civility, and this thing of, and when something is said that really is unkind, such as referring to the president as lying, that's beyond the pale. That's over the top for me. You respect the office, So I can tell you that 2 senators who are, one had a lot of seniority and has recently left, but he said just in the last 24 months that he'd never seen anything like the way the Senate had spiraled down. And another person who's been there for quite some time has said, I've never seen, this is the worst I've ever seen. So I think we need to do an awful lot to join hands, to work together for the good of the people, to remember that public service is a noble profession. You feel like it's almost combat now. And it's, yes, you have your differences and you can argue about it and you can even get upset with somebody, but before dinner's over, you're probably talking about the next issue. And so I do think we have to work hard at getting that civility back the way
I
it should
give you a
be.
good
But
example.
I'm not quite finished. I got one more thing, and that is that right now, in terms of putting of health care going on reconciliation, we all hear that. What that means, if that happens, is that the other side, the Republicans, will not have a chance to be involved at all in how the health care plan will come forward. They won't be able to offer amendments. They won't be able to, it'll pass with 51 votes instead of the 60, which gives you a chance to offer amendments and so on. I think that would be a big mistake.
Well, I think just following that point, I went back and checked all the major piece of legislation, Social Security Act of 1983, the American Disabilities Act, some of the farm legislation, some of the cruelty to animals legislation, things that I was active in, school lunch and things with George McGovern, another loser, but a great friend.
Presidential loser.
Yeah, but there's some people who think a compromise is, they say it's either my way or the highway. If I can't have everything, I'm not going to vote for anything. Now, Ronald Reagan used to tell me, I was a Republican leader, he said, Bob, if you can get me 70%, take it. I'll get the 30% next year. We've got people in both parties who are purists. They won't vary, they're totally rigid on any issue. And there's some issues you got to be probably totally rigid. But you can't be a one-issue person in either party and say, well, I'm not a Republican because of the abortion issue. That's a good example. And I don't think either party was built on one issue. When I started politics after Frank Carlson, if you remember him, conservative, mainstream, middle of the road, I don't know, moderate, whatever, was someone who believed in keeping your taxes low and restraining spending. And that was it. And now you've got all these other things, same-sex marriage and the abortion issue, and we've had busing, and I can make a list of 20 things that are sort of litmus tests. Now, both parties believe in what they believe in. And my only hope is that we have more participation by people in this room. It's not a spectator sport. You can't sit on the sidelines and then complain after it's over that this happened or that happened. But we're the greatest country on the face of the earth. Don't let the evening news tell you anything different. We are the greatest country.
I have one last question, then we're going to open it up to our community questions with the members of the Student Advisory Board. But the GOP suffered two devastating defeats in the last two elections, and just this week, a friend of both of yours, Senator Arlen Specter, switched parties. What's the future of the Republican Party?
And you're looking right at me, so I'll start off. First of all, I was disappointed, and obviously it makes it difficult for the Republicans because it brings it close to that 60 votes. And of course, the Norm Coleman race is still out there being appealed. But you look back through the years, and after Goldwater was defeated, and they said, "Oh, the party's dead," Well, the party came back, and then after Watergate, the party's dead. Well, the party came back. The same thing happened in 1992 with that election, and yet the party came back. And so I think it's a matter of the ideas and being able to articulate them well. And one thing that I feel very strongly about, I think that we need real reform. When I was on the Federal Trade Commission, we went through all of our regulations, everything. And we found that some of them were no more relevant anymore. I mean, some of them were regulating industries that didn't even exist anymore, you know. But there were some that just had outworn their usefulness. And I think it's time that we do that, that we go through and do it from America's perspective, not a Republican perspective, but really go through. And, you know, when times are tough, and they certainly are economically now, we've got a difficult time. This is a time when we could really do something like that and try to rein in a lot of the excessive spending where it isn't doing anybody any good. It's outdated, it's irrelevant, it needs to be dropped, that program, or changed. So I think we should do this.
Good. Well, somebody mentioned Arlen Specter, who's a friend of mine. He went to high school in Russell, Kansas.
Yeah.
He was on the state debate championship team. I thought Nixon should have hired him during Watergate. In fact, I went to the Attorney General, John Mitchell, and said, you ought to hire this bright young attorney in Philadelphia, and he'll clean up this mess, and you can still be president. But I couldn't sell it to him because he was a Democrat, and my view was it shouldn't make any difference what party you're in. So when Arlen announced this, I sent him an email, because when you drive through Russell, there's a sign there, Bob Dole, and I told him we'd removed his name. Your name has been removed from the sign, and we're going to put up pictures of these other people tomorrow. And then I'm headed for Pennsylvania, where I'm going to announce as a candidate for Senate in the Republican Party. But Arlen and I are good friends, and he has a great sense of humor. But he called me up, and he said, you know, Bob, we've been friends forever. I said, Arlen, I'm not serious. You never voted with us anyway. So, you know, the bottom line is that we really don't lose much because he's a very independent person, and he'll give the Democrats fits just as he gave Republicans fits. But I think he is so smart. If I ever got in trouble, I'd run all the way to find him. But he happens to be a liberal. If I lived in Pennsylvania, I might have a different philosophy too, and big labor unions and other things. But Arlen has made a lot of contributions in the health area. He'll do the same as a Democrat. He'll vote about the same. He told President Obama, you know, don't get the feeling I'm going to be an automatic number 60. You know, he's my friend, and I don't like what he did, but he's still my friend.
Very good. We should have a member of our Student Advisory Board walking out at any second, and we'll start our questions from the community.
Are you concerned that because of the increasing hostility in today's political debates, many highly qualified people will simply opt out of competing for public service positions, and in turn the public will have to select from a lesser qualified slate of candidates?
Well, I certainly want to urge young people to consider public service and to come in and make a difference. I think people are focused now, I really do, on what this has become in terms of the rancor and so on. And there's a determination to try to do something about it. I know friends of mine in the Senate feel, you know, okay, this is it. We've really got to have a better environment. And it takes some of the joy from public service. So it's now highlighted, it's focused on, and I can't tell you what a great gift it can be to feel that you're involved in something bigger than yourself, that you found a sense of mission which inspires you. And just, you know, I think about Jack Kemp. He had such enthusiasm because he was really devoted to what he was doing. He believed so much in his cause. And so when I'm on campuses, I often say, find that which turns you on. Find that which gives you that sense of mission and that sense of passion. And I do believe that public service is a noble profession, and that you can find it there at many levels, at the state level, local level, becoming involved with a candidate that you feel is a person of integrity, a person who is going to go about it the right way, and then really working hard for that person. And then you'll find you'll be noted. They'll note what a good job you've done, and the next thing you know, opportunities are opening up for you. So we can't let this set us back. We've got to move forward and be determined that we're going to get it right.
Oh, let's say in the field I was in politics, I never thought it was how I voted. I mean, voting's important, but I never thought people in Russell, Kansas were waiting with bated breath to see I voted on the Chinese treaty or something. What they want to know is if I'd answered their mail, and if I'd worked on their VA or their welfare or their Social Security problem.
Yeah, good point.
And we had a rule that we had to have a letter in the mail. We called it a 36-hour turnaround. Even though we didn't have the answer, that person knew we were checking on it. Now, we may have made mistakes in some cases. And so we're representative. We're your errand boys, so to speak. And we're not there to make these grand statements. Some are, some have the responsibility as in their committees. But, I think some people get carried away with, I have the record of being on Meet the Press. Well, what did that do for me?
I want to tell the airbag story real quickly, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, Bill? Okay. Bob accompanied me when I was to go before the Senate Commerce Committee for my hearing when I'd been nominated to be Secretary of Transportation. And so what does he say? He says, I regret that I have but one wife to give for my country's infrastructure. Paraphrasing Nathan Hale. Now, that was fine. He's okay. But then he says, I think the Federal Highway Administration might be able to use Elizabeth's biscuit recipe for filling potholes. And that's when I said, I know all about airbags because I have been driving around with one for years. You stole my story.
You gotta have a little life, a little fun in life.
That's right.
Okay, let's have our next question.
In the Senate, you were well known for your great sense of humor. Which of your colleagues made you laugh the most?
Pat Roberts.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to keep reading up to keep up with him anymore. But Pat Roberts, Dale Bumpers from Arkansas, Alan Simpson from Wyoming. But they told these long, long stories. I don't like to tell those. I like to get it over with. And, we've written we compiled a book on humor. It's called Great Political Wit, and the subtitle is Laughing Almost All the Way to the White House. And it's a book that I compiled, and it became a bestseller. And we had so much fun with that, we wrote another one called Great Presidential Wit, and the subtitle was, I Wish I Was in This Book. So, I don't know, I've always had to try to have a little...
Astor.
Pardon?
Winston Churchill and Lady Astor.
Yeah, well, Elizabeth remind me of the one book, the greatest line was probably not true, and you probably heard it, but apparently Winston Churchill was having a big dinner, and he and Lady Astor were at the same table, and they got in a big, verbal fisticuff, and she finally, in desperation, looked at me and said, Winston, if you were my husband, I would poison your coffee. He said, if you were my wife, I would drink it. Is that good, clean fun? I mean, And like Reagan said, he walked into a room like this, and He said, boy, have I getting a lot of flack lately since I ordered those B-1s. He said, how was I to know they're airplanes? He said, I thought they were vitamins for the troops. And whatever you think of Ronald Reagan, he got more votes because of his personality. And he's willing to laugh at himself, not somebody else, but to poke fun at himself. That just sort of swayed people if they were kind of on the fence. He could bring them to the White House and change their mind.
This question is for Senator Elizabeth Dole and was submitted anonymously. Over the course of your distinguished career, you have worked both inside the government as Cabinet Secretary and U.S. Senator and outside for the Red Cross. Which sector is more rewarding, and where do you think a person can have the most impact?
Oh, that's one where I simply would not want to choose one or the other, because I think the Red Cross really is another form of service to the public. And each of the positions were challenging, no question about it. And I'd say that, in terms of volunteering, Bob mentioned my first year at the Red Cross, I served as a volunteer because I had so much respect for the volunteers. You couldn't have a Red Cross without the 1.3 million volunteers. So there's an opportunity right there to become involved now while you're still in school or whatever else you might be doing. But we had to undertake a number of changes at the Red Cross. For example, our chapters had never been rechartered. And so we had a set of standards. You must meet this standard or you're going to lose your charter. And a lot of them lost their charters. We had a new field service, and every 5 years now they have to be rechartered. So, and also with disaster relief, we went through disaster revitalization because we needed to have like a war room where it never shuts down, and the press they can call and find out what's going on, and you can move your people and your equipment wherever it's needed with all these disasters, because Red Cross handles about 66,000 disasters a year, from the big earthquakes to the house fires. And we also had to change the blood program, and this took 7 years. It was very decentralized. And this went back to World War II. That's when the Red Cross first started collecting and testing and distributing blood. But it needed to be centralized to change the whole way it was done. So you had standard operating procedures. And we were regulated by the FDA. So I think each of the jobs was challenging in its own right. Labor Department was child labor laws were being violated. There were all sorts of things that we needed to do. But you go into a position and you look at, okay, what are the 5 or 6 or 7 things that cry out for change, that need to be done? And then you assemble an excellent team around you, people who share your passion for getting these things done. And then, come hell or high water, you're going to make those things happen. And I would say that certainly government offers that opportunity. Politics, and so does the American Red Cross and many other wonderful charitable organizations.
Okay. Next
Hello.
question.
Hello, my name is Chelsea Mertz, and I am a junior from Hoyt, Kansas. This question is for Senator Bob Dole, and it is also anonymously submitted. You have accomplished an awful lot since leaving the Senate in 1996, including writing a memoir and raising money for the World War II Memorial on the National Mall. Which activities are you particularly proud of?
I think raising $195 million for the World War II Memorial. Now, let me make it clear, I didn't raise it by myself. We had a lot of volunteers, people in Kansas. But our generation is a little different, and I see some people in our generation. We said if we can't raise the money, we're not going to build it. We're not going to go up to Congress and take money away from some double amputee. He'll get less if we take money for bricks and mortar. And so that was our goal, and it was hard to reach, and we were sued as by a couple of veterans who said we shouldn't build this memorial on sacred ground. So they had a group called Save Them All. Our defense was we'd already saved it in World War II. How many times do you want to save it? And the judge finally ruled in our favor, but it cost us $30 million for legal fees and all that. So the point is, the government gave us $5 million for startup, and we have interest, of course, and so we raised a lot of money. But anyway, it's built, it's wonderful, and we have this great program called Honor Flight, where if your father, grandfather, somebody wants to make this trip, it's the most emotional thing that ever happened.
It really is.
And you'll be tears in your eyes all day. But I try to meet every flight that comes. Yesterday we had, I think, 6 states. A week ago Saturday we had 11 states with 800 veterans. But it's just such a wonderful thing to be there and to see these, I don't want to say old guys, I mean, these fellows have gotten older. What fun they're having. It's not all gloom and doom and people sit around with a box of Kleenex. They generally do. But
That too.
they have a lot of fun. And they're proud of what they did. You know, where would we be without that generation? I know there are a lot of young people who have doubts about our country. I was there 37 years, and I never got a single letter or a phone call or a meeting. Somebody stopped me saying, "Bob, get me out of this awful country." I never got one, not one letter. So that tells you something.
A couple more questions, I think.
But I've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters saying, "Bob, can you help get me into this country?" So don't be, you know, we still have basic values, and we still live by those values. We all make mistakes, and we try to, you know, redeem ourselves. So I'm very happy being an American.
Yes.
Well, Senators, thank you both so very much today. This has been a fabulous afternoon that we'll never forget. We
Oh,
really
thank you.
appreciate it.